Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to be thinking about how to use augmentation and diminution techniques as a means of developing a composition that you might be writing. So first of all, let's just be entirely clear what we mean by these terms. So augmentation, well, when you augment something, you make it bigger. Diminution, obviously, is the opposite. You're making it smaller. So, I have too much to eat at Christmas, and in January, my stomach has augmented. So my good wife helps me to go on a diet in order to bring about some diminution of my stomach size in the post-Christmas period. So we can apply this in all sorts of walks of life, can't we? That being one of them. When we're applying it musically, it often applies in terms of rhythm. And this is why it's a particularly useful technique when you're writing, because you might well have come up with a good idea for a composition. This is something that lots of people tell me they've done. I've got this amazing idea, but I'm not quite sure what to do with it. How do I develop it? How do I use it? Because some people get a bit stuck. They've got the idea, not quite sure what to do with it. You can embellish it. You can kind of do all sorts of different harmonies or something. But then maybe you've kind of run out of ideas for what you can do next. Well, this idea of augmentation and diminution is quite handy. Basically, at a fundamental level, one thing you can think about is in terms of augmentation, if you've got a musical idea, particularly a melodic idea, just try doubling the note lengths. Or if you're thinking about, well, I've got this idea, would diminution work? Well, that's the opposite, halve the note lengths. So you can see what I'm doing in this particular exercise that we see before us. So I've written a musical idea. It's got a kind of sort of Baroque flavour to it, but that doesn't matter. You could do this in any genre at all. Here's the initial idea. Okay, so just a sort of simple two-part thing. It doesn't have to be that at all. But you can see what I've got in the right hand. I've got this melodic idea. It's 4 bars long, 4 measures long, and there's a design behind it. There's a rising fourth there going from the dominant to the tonic, and then the rising fourth comes again a note higher. So there's a little bit of sequence going on in there. And then there's a kind of sort of tail to that phrase. So if you like, this is the kind of head of the phrase, the rising fourth used twice. And then we've got a tail, which is doing this. It's a little bit busier rhythmically, but it's taking us into this 5-1 cadence. So that's the simple idea, and alongside that I've just written a kind of walking bass line, sort of Baroque style, to go under it. So say I've kind of stated this compositional idea, maybe I've repeated it, you could do some elaboration to it. So that'll be one way of just elaborating what you've got. So that sort of thing you can get up to. You could think, well, could I do something else with a harmony? Well, maybe I could start as it is and then go G sharp into A major and then back to D, so you've got some way of colouring it. Or instead of arriving at the cadence, instead of going to D major, you could do something like A sharp, go to B minor. So, there are things you can do, aren't there, to elaborate the melody, to do something with a harmony. That's my point. But here's another alternative. What I'm doing on the second line here is taking this melodic line and presenting it with all the note lengths doubled. Now, it comes sometimes with a slight disadvantage. And that's why I've purposely written this in a particular way. If you've got reasonably long notes in the original, so we've got 2 beats on each of these notes, haven't we? And then we've got 4 beats on this, there's only a bit of movement in the middle. Of course, when you augment it, all these 2-beat notes become 4-beat notes, which means that that melody is kind of sort of not really moving so much. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on. It's kind of, you start to lose the thread of the melody, if you like. However, if you can keep the other parts moving, do you see what I've done here? I've used this melodic line, the right hand of the original, in augmentation, but I've kind of maintained the movement of the original bass line. So this is not particularly linked to the original bass line. I'm sort of just doing something slightly different this time. And you'll notice I've even changed some of the harmonies. So I've gone to B minor there, there's a hint of A major there, then we come back to D again. But, you know, in order to make the accompanying harmony a bit more interesting, taken that we've got these longer notes, and trying to include a bit more energy in the rhythm of the left hand part to make up for those long notes. So if you've got relatively long notes and then you augment them, you're going to have much longer notes. You're then going to have to think about how to mitigate that in the other parts that are going on. Otherwise it could just feel as if it's all ground to a halt. So it wouldn't work to do an augmentation of this if I had a bass line that was doing something similar. Well, we've all lost the will to live by this point, haven't we? So you've got to keep that left hand moving in order to cope with these longer notes in the right hand. On the other hand, if you can get the accompaniment moving and you can enjoy these long notes, there's something rather wonderful and grand about expanding the length of the phrase through augmentation. So what I'm now going to do, I'm going to play the original, and then straight away I'm going to play the augmented version of it, so you can compare that. You can hear how these relatively long notes become rather longer, but how the left hand keeps things moving. So here's the original at the top. Here's the augmentation. I'm purposely doing this in 2 parts because in many ways it's easier to make this sound good if you're in more parts. If I had 3 or 4 parts, well, we could be kind of quite busy in 2 of the parts and then just have these long notes kind of going across the top like that. And then those long notes have a kind of majesty about them. But if you can make it work in 2 parts, well, you'll be able to make it work in 3 or 4 parts quite happily. But you see what it does? It lengthens the phrase. We have this kind of big, spacious approach to the melody. Okay, well, the danger, we said, of having relatively slow moving notes is that when you augment them, then they become even slower moving. If you've got really busy notes, you've got lots of, quarter notes, 8th notes, maybe 16th notes, then diminution has the opposite problem, because then everything goes madly fast and sometimes it just doesn't work. However, the advantage of writing an idea that's using kind of 2-beat notes is that you can augment them to be kind of 4-beat notes. That works quite well. But you can also use them in diminution, so they just become 1-beat notes. So let me now show you what's going on here. If I play the original and then play the same thing in diminution, you'll see how it works the other way. So exactly the same melody as we've got here, but all the notes half the length. And the bass line, well, okay, I've got this going in basically 8th notes and quavers, even using semi-quavers, 16th notes there to match up with these. And you'll kind of get the idea of how this one sounds. Here's the original. Diminution. You see the impact that has. It really energizes the thing, doesn't it? And you can see that across the course of a composition, you've just got another little technique in your toolkit that you might be able to pull out. So you can embellish, you can change harmony, you can write an answering phrase to the 4-bar phrase that you might have here. Lots of things you can do, but then you might just think, oh, I wonder as we go through this piece, whether some augmentation or diminution or both would actually work. So you don't have to use both, you could use one and not the other. And as I say, sometimes the design of the original lends itself to augmentation or to diminution, but not particularly to the other, because things end up going too slowly or too quickly or something. But it's just another useful technique. It's also just useful to know about because if you're playing music, you might well discover that these techniques are being used in the music you're playing. And sometimes you can have a melody that comes along and you think, oh yes, I'm enjoying this melody and bringing it out in my performance. And then you don't realize that it comes in augmentation or diminution. So you kind of miss it, that it's the same melody. So it's good to be able to analyze it and see what's going on in a piece and spot augmentation and diminution. You'll find it very commonly, for example, in fugue. A lot of composers will write a fugue subject and then use it later on in augmentation or diminution as a way of kind of developing things later in the fugue. So it's a good thing to be able to spot if you're a performer, and it's another little technique to bear in mind if you're a composer. So there we are, augmentation and diminution. Well, if you've enjoyed this video, let me invite you to take a trip to the Music Matters website, www.mmcourses.co.uk. When you get to the homepage, click on courses. Lots of courses there, but one that might particularly interest you in relation to this video is a course we've got on writing counterpoint. And that really is working with some of these techniques and taking them much further. So if you're really wanting to write independent lines and really get your contrapuntal writing going, that would be an ace course for you to have a look at. Much more on the website, so have a look and see what's there. www.mmcourses.co.uk.